Well, 8 hours just go by fast.
Okay, on page 238, just to let you guys know, this is where section or chapter 5 starts, or section 1 for sure. And what we're going to talk about for this particular chapter is radicals. Another name for radical is square root, okay, or cube root, fourth root, whatever. It's going to be a different number inside the crack. Okay, and I'll explain what that means here in just a second. But the first thing that's going to ask you to do is it's going to say n equals 3, and then it's going to have a equals negative 216. And what it wants you to do is it wants you to find the indicated real nth root of a. And what that means is the n is going to tell you what number goes in the crack. What I mean by crack is the square root to me looks like a house, and you put it over top. This right here is the crack. So the 3 is going to go in the crack. Okay? And then the other number, the a, goes underneath the square root. So what number goes underneath?
216.
Negative 216. Now, when we're simplifying this, first and foremost, you can do negatives. You do not need to take your eyes out because it is an odd root. If it's an even root, then we'd have to take eyes out, but we're not going to have eyes for this. It's only if it's negative, or an odd root, that you'll have negatives. Okay, so first of all, when you have a negative underneath the square root and you have a 3 in the crack like that, your answer is going to be negative. It's not plus or minus. It's going to be negative because there's a negative underneath and it's an odd root. Now, what I need to know from you guys is what times what times what gives you 216? Now, you may or may not have forgot this or whatever, but remember when I did this with you guys about a month and a half ago? Where I tried to do that and we were doing square roots? Now, the only difference with this one is because there's a 3 in your crack, you're going to then look at if there's 3 of the same. Sorry, Sarah.
That's okay.
Okay? So, does 2 go into 216?
Yes.
How many times? 108. Does 2 go into 108?
Yes.
How many times? 54. Good. Does 2 go into 54? How many times? 27. Does 2 go into 27? No. Does 3? Yes. How many times? 9. Does 3 go into 9? How many times? And 3 goes into itself 1 time. So now, like when we did this before, remember how we look for pairs of the same number? This time, because there's a 3 in the crack, you're going to look for groups of 3 of the same number. Okay? Instead of actually remembering what perfect cube numbers are, we can actually just look for groups of 3. Or if it said 4 or 5 or 6, we look for that many of each of the same. Do we have a group of 3 2s? Yes. Do we have a group of 3 3s? Yes. Is there anything left over, by the way? No. What's 2 times 3? So my answer was negative 6. 2 times 3 is 6. Okay? N equals 4. A equals 81.
Is this all?
Kind of. Okay, what number goes in the crack? 4. What number goes underneath the house? 81. So again, I'm looking for the 4th root of 81. That's how you would pronounce that, because there's a 4 in the crack. So 81. Does 2 go into 81? How about 3?
Yeah.
Yes? If you didn't know, 8 plus 1 is 9, and since 9 is a multiple of 3, so is 81. What's 81 divided by 3? 27. Hey, that number looks familiar. 3 goes in there 9 times, 3 goes in there 3 times, and 3 goes in there once. Do I have a group of 4 of the same number?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any left over? No. So my answer is 3. What you will not find with this one is you will not find a negative underneath that because it was an even root. Okay? You will not find a negative underneath there, nor will you have to tell me it's plus or minus this, because we're not solving an equation. We're just finding what the roots are. Okay? How are you guys so far with that? Not too bad?
Good.
Pretty easy? Awesome. Second thing that you're going to do is it's going to give you something like this, and at first you might freak out because there's a fraction in there. It's going to say 16 to the 1/2. And a lot of people will cringe right away because they see fraction and they go, oh no, how do I do that? Okay, now, what a fraction is, just so that you guys know, or a fractional exponent, it is nothing more than a square root. It's the same thing, or a root of some sort, a radical. This number right there is the number that belongs in the crack. Now, if it's a 2, do you need to write 2 there? Or can we just have the square root house? You can just have the square root house, or if you put the 2 there, it's not wrong. Okay? So again, if I just rewrite that like that, I can leave that 2 in there, or I could not. What's the base number?
16.
16 goes on the inside. What number is on top of the 1/2, or the 2? 1. You can do the 1 either here, or you could put the 1 around parentheses and put it there. Either way, it's the same answer. Whatever makes it easier for you.
So if there's like a 3/4 in there, the 4 would go into the crack of it, the 3 would go.
Absolutely. Okay? So now, for this particular thing, what's the square root of 16? 4. And 4 to the first power is 4. Now, if that would have been like 5/2, for instance, if it would have been 16 to the 5/2, I would have taken the square root of 16, which is 4, and then taken 4 to the 5th power, whatever that number happens to be. That's what calculators are for. Okay? What do you guys think? So far? No, not today. Okay, what do I do here?
Put the 5 in the crack.
Keep running in my feet.
Keep playing footsie with you. What do I do with the negative, though? That's the thing.
Do you play with, or it goes on the inside?
Close.
Do you just take your eye out?
No, don't have to take the eye out. What happens? How do you get rid of a negative exponent? No. Good guess, though.
Put it over.
If it's on top, because right now this is like saying 32 to the negative 3/5 on the top. If it's on the top, then it needs to move to the bottom and vice versa. If it's on the bottom, you move it up. So for any time you have a negative exponent, if it's on the top of the equation or top of the expression, you put it to the bottom and vice versa. Okay? Now from here, you just you continue to put the 1 on the top.
That's who you're recording now.
I know. Okay? For this particular thing, then, what you do is you just simplify the bottom and leave it as 1 over whatever we're going to get. So, when we do 32 to the 3/5, that's a 5 going in the crack, 32. Now, here's my plug for this. If I put the 3 underneath with the 32, that means you're going to have to take 32 times 32 times 32 and get a giant number and then take the 5th root of that. Do you want to use big numbers? Me personally, no. So what I usually do is I usually do it this way, where I'm going to have it where the 3 goes on the outside. So I'm going to do the cube root of 32 first. Or the 5th root, sorry, I think I said cube root. But the 5th root of 32 first, which is a small number, and then raise that to the 3rd power. Does that make sense? Okay. So 32, can 2 go into 32? Yes. How many times? 16. Can 2 go into 16? 8. Can 2 go into 8? How about into 4? How about into 2? Is there 5 of the same things?
Yep.
There's 5 deuces. So what is 2 to the 3rd?
8.
8. So that number is 8. So realistically, that whole bottom or that whole answer turned out to be 1/8. Okay? If you have a negative exponent, that needs to move to the bottom. Okay, that's one of those exponent rules that you guys had a couple years ago. Okay? Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Do you like how we moved it to a smaller number and then cubed it rather than taking 32 to the third and then reducing it down to find out that the answer would have been 8? 5 times? And me personally, I like it that way too. Then, what happens if it doesn't come out like that? If it has 9 to the 1/5? What if it says 9 to the 1/5? That's the 5th root of 9. Because 5 would go in the crack, and what does 9 break down 5 times into something? No, it doesn't. So on this particular thing, it's going to say use a calculator. How do you type 9 to the 1/5? 9 caret. Now, depending on the age of your calculator, if you've got an older one, I'd suggest you put 1/5 in as a fraction in parentheses. If you've got a newer calculator, when you have the caret, you can just type 1 divided by 5. You don't need to put it in parentheses. But if you've got an older one, you're going to want to put it in parentheses. And then it's going to spit out a number at you, and it's going to say round to 2 decimal places. What'd you guys get? And done. Yeah, that's it. Okay, now, keep this in mind. Watch this now. Do me a favor. Type 16 to the 1/2 in your calculator. We got 4. Yay, team. Then, type 32 to the negative 3/5 in your calculator. And you got it some decimal, right? Now frac it. Hit math. And then enter twice. And what fraction do you come up with? 1/8, just like we did by hand. Okay? That 1.55 I don't think fracks. Okay? If you were to, because that 1.55 I believe was a rounded answer, correct?
Yeah.
So if you did 9 to the 1/5, like we did here, and if you try to frac it and it comes right back out with the same decimal that you had, then it can't frac. Frac is short for fraction, not what they do over in Williston. Okay?
Funny. That's easy.
No. Okay, the last thing that we're going to do is something like this, where you're going to solve for x. This is where you would add in the plus or minus if it needs it. Okay? So, how do you solve an equation?
Divide by 4.
Don't set it equal to 0.
Divide by 4.
Get x by itself. How do I get x by itself?
Divide by 4.
Divide by 4 first. So remember, you're undoing the order of operations, which means add or subtract anything out first, multiply or divide anything second. Third would be get rid of exponents. Right now I have x to the 5th equals, I believe, 32.
I don't know how to do this.
Now, in the past we've had square there, so then you square rooted, correct?
Yeah.
So if it's a 5,
You 5 root it?
you 5th root it. Right, which means you put a 5 in the crack. Okay, now, from here, the 5th root of x to the 5th is x. When these numbers match, they cancel each other out and gives you just x. When it's an odd root, it's not plus or minus. When it's an odd root, it's whatever the answer or underneath the house is. So if it's a positive number there, then the answer is positive. If it's negative underneath there, then the answer is negative. If it's an odd root. If it's an even root, like a 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on, then it's plus or minus. Okay? Like when we square rooted to get rid of it, you remember how I always preached to you guys about plus or minus and I marked off and you didn't have it? If it's an even root, it needs to be plus or minus in this situation. If it's an odd root, it's whatever number was underneath there. If it's positive, it's positive. If it's negative, it's negative. Anybody know what the fifth root of 32 is? 2. And you're done. Okay, so 32, you could break it down like this.
Yeah.
And you're looking for 5 of the same thing, yep.
Oh, yeah, I get it. Never mind.
Okay.
Good job, Ange. It took Ange a while. But she got it now.
Okay, again, if it's an odd root, it's whatever the answer is. So if it's negative underneath there, it's negative. If it's positive, it's positive. The number 5 is an odd number. If it's an odd root, then in whatever this is, so if this is positive underneath there, then your answer is positive. If it's a negative underneath there, then your answer is negative. If it's an even power or even root, like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, so on, then plus or minus.
You could have left and like have him call you. Yeah, well, we were going.
Not positive 5 if it was like 6 or 4. Like this one.
Drive to school and then drive back. And then it was like 11 when I got done.
Okay.
Do you want to just
Remember in solving these, we're trying to get rid of the order of operations. Is there any adding or subtracting outside of the parentheses? No. Is there multiplication on the outside of the parentheses?
What the heck did I
No. How do I get rid of something to the fourth? You fourth root it. Right. Which means you put a big giant house with the 4 in the crack. And what you do to one side, got to do the other. Now, for this part, x minus 3 is all that comes out on the left. When this number matches this number, they cancel each other out, leaving you just x minus 3. On the right-hand side, first and foremost, is this an even root or an odd root? Even, so plus or minus should be there. Does the fourth root of 81 reduce? 21, sorry. But not perfect, right? So what you do is you leave it as the fourth root of 21. If it does not reduce, because remember when we do 21, 3 goes in there 7 times, 7 goes in there once. There's no pairs there or 4 of the same, is there? Okay? So that did not reduce at all, so you leave it as the fourth root of 21. Now, how do you get x by itself? Add 3. When you add 3 to a root like that, you just put 3 plus or minus the fourth root of 21. You can't actually physically add them together. You just put them as 2 different pieces like that. Okay? What do you think? That's about as hard as they get. That's the last little bit today. Okay? Were you guys comfortable with those?
Yeah.
Were you guys okay with those? Yeah. Okay, so. (5 to 31 odd) and 35 to 43 odd. I know it seems like a lot, but it's not.